Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. This is Inclusive Design 24, 2022. Big thank you to our platinum sponsors, Fable and Entopia, and our gold sponsors, Barrier Break, TPGI, and UX for the Win. If you use Twitter, you can find us on there at ID24Conf, and the hashtag that we'll be using for this conference is hashtag ID24. And while you're watching on YouTube, if you're logged in, you can also participate in the chat. Hope to see you there. And with all that said, I'm now going to hand it over to my co-host, Roberto. Take it away.
Thank you. So next we have Mike Herkel about the practical styling in forced colored mode. So Mike, over to you.
Hey everybody, my name is Mike Herschel and this is Practical Styling for Forced Colors mode. So I'm from Gainesville, Florida. I like hammocks, dogs, hikings. I'm a front-end developer at AVB Digital. I do a lot of Drupal core maintenance, including for the new Olivera theme, which is the new look and feel for Drupal. I've learned a lot of these lessons that I'm going to kind of share with you through the creation of this theme and maintenance of that. Drupal has a very high commitment to accessibility, and that includes Forced Colors mode. You can find me on Mike Herschel at Twitter and M Herschel on LinkedIn, and you can tweet questions at the ID24 hashtag, or I think in the chat, and the hosts will keep on top of that. Right now I'm in Prague though. I took this picture last night from the Charles Bridge, which was like this really cool bridge where I guess there was this Mission Impossible scene in the movie. And you can see the big old castle on the top. It's beautiful. So it's about 9 a.m. where I am, but at home it is about 3 a.m. So today, this is what we're going to look at doing. I'm going to give an intro and talk about me. We're already done with that. We're going to talk about Windows High Contrast, what Forced Colors is, common problems and tools that you can use to solve that. We're going to talk about testing. We're going to do a sing-along. And by sing-along, I mean, we're just going to open up a code pen and just fix some common scenarios. If you have any questions, we can actually audit your websites. I don't know if we're going to have time for that. We'll see how things go. And that's about it. So let's talk about Windows High Contrast and Forced Colors and like what that difference really is, right? So Windows High Contrast is the most popular assistive technology that uses Forced Colors. And according to Microsoft, 4% of Windows users use High Contrast. Forced Colors mode is when assistive technology actively changes the colors. You know, it will change your authored styles to accommodate people with limited vision. And so it will enforce the user's color palette, which could be either like something like light on dark, dark on light. There's various versions, there's various permutations of each, and you can even come up with your own palettes, including this pretty hideous, was it green on fuchsia red palette that I made up. But people will do this. People will come up with their own palettes so they can see and use your website better, and we need to accommodate that. So how does Forced Colors work? It overrides various CSS properties, including things like color, border color, outline color, background color, and it disables other CSS properties, including things like box shadow, text shadow, and background images when it's not actually, like if you're using things like linear gradients. Background images will show if it has like a URL to the image. But what does it use for those colors? It overrides those colors, but it uses new colors that are defined within the CSS spec called CSS system colors. And they're things like canvas text, canvas, link text, visited text, active text. And like through the, you can kind of guess what they are, and you're pretty much correct. You know, canvas is obviously the background color of the web page. Canvas text is the text in front of that. And so when you're creating or you're editing a Windows High Contrast theme, you can choose these. You can open up the control panel, and there's, you know, little UI where you can set your color of your text, your colors of your hyperlinks, and your colors of your selected text or whatever. and they map to these. And I also want to say that those system colors are there. That's not a full list. There's more. You can check out the spec or Google it or whatever you need to see all the stuff. But those are the ones that I tend to use. So this is practical styling with force colors. So I'm going to talk about some common problems with common solutions and stuff like that. So let's look at the problems first. So as with many accessibility problems or many accessibility issues, a lot of times it involves forms. With force colors modes, I see issues where the boundaries of the form elements are not communicated or the forms are not identifiable as form elements. And so this image right here in my slide deck this is Google Forms, you know, and you would think that Google Forms would do things correct, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. In force colors mode, we have a select drop down right here, and it's a custom select. And so you can see that in force colors mode, the little triangle that indicates it's a select element changes into a square, which kind of just looks a little weird. You don't know that it's a select element. In addition to that, you can see the button on the bottom, that select button. You can see before and after. It doesn't communicate the boundary of where that is, and it could just look like text. You don't have an idea that that's actually a button. Stuff like this is pretty common. Something else that I see a lot is focus states are not apparent in the same element right here. This is what the focus state is when you're not, like when you're in regular mode, when you're not in force colors. It just changes the background color, right? But as I said earlier, we know that the background colors are not apparent in force colors mode. So the focus state just doesn't work. The focus state is active here, but you can't tell that because background colors are removed. So this is obviously a clear violation of, you know, focus visible. You can't tell that this is focus. So this is an issue, and this is something that we've all done. I'm not trying to, you know, indict Google on poor accessibility, because this is really common. This is stuff that I've done before. You know, back before I learned about force colors. Not a lot of people, not enough people know about it. Element boundaries are, what's the word I'm looking for? Defining element boundaries are not always communicated properly. You know, and that's because things like box shadow gets removed and background colors removed. So here's a modal window. I think this is on maybe the Guardian's website or Economist. And so you can see in regular mode, the boundary of the modal is pretty apparent because there's a background color, there's an overlay. In force colors mode, of course, the background color of the overlay gets removed, and you can't tell that this is a modal. You kind of maybe get a little idea only because of that big advertisement at the top that it covers up, but it looks really weird, and it can be kind of disconcerting. You don't have an idea what's going on. And so this is another common issue. Iconography is something that I see a lot, right? I see tons of issues with iconography. If you're using background images as icons, that could have problems. And then sometimes SVGs can have problems too. So this is BBC's website from just maybe about a week or two ago. And so you can see at the top of this, there's 3 dots right there. And the 3 dots are an icon, I think. I forget if they're SVG or what they are. SVG fills do not automatically adjust, you know, so the background images don't automatically adjust. So these 3 dots open up a submenu, but you can see these 3 dots if you're on a dark on light theme, but if you go to a light on dark theme, they completely disappear. And so that's, once again, that's an issue. It doesn't properly communicate it doesn't communicate the effect of or the function of what's about to happen right here. So that's an issue. So how do we fix this stuff, you know? And there's a lot of different, there's a number of different new tools that CSS gives you to fix this stuff, including there's a media query, forced colors. There's a forced color adjust CSS property. And then we already talked about CSS system colors. In addition to those, there's things like the current color keyword is very useful. We'll talk about that in a bit. Transparent borders and transparent outlines are very useful because transparent borders and transparent outlines will become apparent in force colors mode because as I stated earlier, force colors mode changes those colors. So it will change your border color to something like canvas text or your outline color to canvas text. I use a lot of the mask image CSS property, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And then you can use things like clip path CSS property, and you can use those in conjunction with CSS system colors to help out with iconography. So let's kind of look at these tools in depth right here. So force colors media query is it works almost exactly like you think it should. You know, the syntax is force colors active. So you see app media force colors active. This will become active when force colors is turned on. And at that point, you can change things like your fill and your SVG, as you can see what I'm doing right here. Forced color adjust property. This doesn't work in Firefox, FYI, but you can say do not change this particular selector. And that is fairly useful. And something else that tripped me up here, I'm kind of highlighting this. It's not force colors, it's not plural, it's force color adjust, which is different than the media query. So just if you're going to use this and you're wondering why it's not working, that might be why. And once again, this is not supported by Firefox, so just keep that in mind. So current color. So current color is a pretty useful keyword, right? So it will change whatever value, or it will change the property of where it's being used to whatever the current color is. And so you can see in this particular case, we're using it for this icon right here, and we're changing the fill to current color. This used to not work, but it was fixed in I think it was Chrome 102. It was fixed. So when I was doing all my other work in Drupal core to make this work, we had to use a whole bunch of media queries and system colors. But now it's a heck of a lot easier. You can just type in your color and have your fill be the current color. And this is an easy way to do stuff. It avoids the media queries, and it just works really well. So that's going to be kind of a best practice. Imperceptible boundaries is something that I went over a little bit earlier, right? So a lot of people will style their buttons with something like this. You can see there, appearance none will remove the default appearance of a button. You remove the border because you don't want a border on a button, and then you just hit the background of blue, and that will make a nice pretty button. But of course, that background doesn't become apparent in force colors mode. So instead of having a border of 0, set your border to a transparent 1 pixels, or something like that. And if you really want to be cool, add a comment in there. Other developers will come in after you and they'll be like, why the heck are you adding this transparent border? And if they have a comment in there, they'll be like, well, what the heck is force colors? And maybe they'll search for it, and then they'll learn something, and everybody will be happy. Imperceptible focus states are basically the same thing. You can see that in this code right here, we're using box shadow as a focus state, and box shadow once again gets removed, as does the background color. So in this particular case, we're going to add an outline and an outline offset, and we're going to add that comment in there, and everybody's going to be happy. It's going to work in force colors mode, and it's also going to have the same exact focus state if you're not using force colors mode, because the outline is transparent. So this is a really great best practice and ways to do things to make it work everywhere. Something that really tripped me up for a very long time is the select menu. Select dropdown. Everybody knows and uses these. You saw earlier that Google kind of rolled their own, which if you're an accessibility person, which you are since you're watching this, rolling your own form elements is often pretty dangerous. A lot of people will kind of get around that by styling the select, which I do. So you use code like this with appearance none. You set your padding. Within selects, you can't use things like pseudo elements to the before and after. So people will add a background image there, and add a border. And will it work? The problem is that the background image doesn't necessarily take into effect the theme of forced colors. So like, let's say if your select has a white background, so the chevron that's pointing down is dark, that chevron won't show up if the user has a forced colors theme that has like a dark background, and then vice versa. So the easiest way to go around this is just to kind of undo what you did, so revert the appearance back to the user to the browser's default. And that will put that default select chevron in there that the browser inserts, and that will automatically adjust to forced colors mode. And then you add your background in there. And this is something that I know this code is pretty straightforward, but honestly, it took me like far too long to figure this out and to get this working properly. But we're using this all over the admin interface of Drupal core, and it works great, and we've tested it out. Iconography, once again, is a pretty common problem. So you can see in this particular icon right here, this is an SVG, and we're using a named color called Papaya Whip, which is such a fun thing to say, as the fill color. That's not going to change. The fill color is not going to change. So a better way to do this is to set the text. Let me go back here. So this is the improper way, and then this is the proper way. So the proper way is to set the color, the text color, to Papaya Whip, and then set your fill to current color. And this is what we talked about a little bit earlier. This is best practice. It degrades gracefully, and it's a great way to do it. Everybody's going to be happy, including people in forced colors mode. Background images. This is one that's was a little difficult because we're using a lot of background images within Drupal core. And so we have to get this to work, So in this particular link right here, this renders as an icon. And so we have a background image with a PNG right here. And a lot of people do this. It's pretty common. This icon, the PNG, will show up. It will render, but depending on if it's light or dark, we're not necessarily confident that it's going to show up, depending on what theme that the high contrast theme that the user has. So we solve this using the mask image CSS property in combination with the forced colors media query. So you can see that we have a forced colors media query right here, and then we're using mask image. The mask image is this really neat CSS property. It creates what's called a jack-o'-lantern effect. And if y'all are from the USA, you kind of know what a jack-o'-lantern is. If you're not, and around Halloween, we carve out pumpkins, we put a candle inside of them, and you can see the light of the candle shining through. In much the same way, what we do is we have the background be a named color, like link text or something like that. Honestly, you could probably use current color here if you want to. And then the mask image will limit the color that shines through to just the opaque parts of the image. And this works pretty well. It's kind of a complicated idea to get your head around, but I'm hoping I'm explaining it right. If not, use the ID24 hashtag and be like, Mike, what the heck are you talking about? There's a couple caveats on this. So you have to use the WebKit prefix with Chromium. Something else that is really important with the mask image is it will mask everything, including outlines and everything like that. So if you're using a focus state with an outline and you have mask image applied to that same element, it's going to remove that focus state. And so you can get around that by, you can see in this example right here, we're using it on a pseudo element, on that before pseudo element, and that works perfectly. That works the way it is. But this is a point where you really need to test on here. So once again, you need to add a WebKit prefix to this. It's going to mask any borders and outlines. And this could be a little tricky if you don't test it. And it's going to mask any text that's in the element. So when you're using that WebKit mask, you want to throw that into a pseudo element or its own little element in there. The biggest thing, if I can get anyone on who's listening to this or watching this to do, is just test it. You know, just test. Like, if you can identify the problems, you can search for the problems, you can find the solutions. Please test. So how do you test, right? So there's a couple different ways. The easiest way now, and this is really neat if you're on a Mac, is that Chromium version 98 and later, you can do it through developer tools. I'll show you how to do that in a second. And that's really awesome, and it seems to work pretty well. Sometimes it will actually crush developer tools, but overall it pretty much works. And when you're testing that, by default, you're going to see kind of a dark text on a white background. But if there's a little drop down for the first color scheme, and you can flip that to light text on a dark background, and it'll switch themes. So that's pretty cool. You can test force colors on Mac and Linux. Here's what it looks like. This is an animated GIF right here. So we open up developer tools, we open up the drawer, we go into rendering, and you scroll down and you can see it. And we're switching the theme right there. You can see the logo doesn't show up here on the ID24 website. This should loop, so I'm going to let it loop one more time because this is pretty cool. So here we go. We're going into the rendering. We scroll down, look for that force colors emulation. We set it to active. You can click around, play with that, and then you can toggle your color scheme layer right like that too. I also like to use virtual machines for testing. Virtual machines are pretty neat because they give you they give you a little bit maybe more empathy on to what the actual users are doing. You know, the Chrome is just emulation. It seems to work pretty well, but it's not exactly the same. You know, so virtual machines give you a really great experience, and it also gives you the ability to test out different browsers, including Firefox. And you can also try out different high contrast themes, right? So if you're hopefully y'all are using virtual machines if you're front-end developers to test things out, right? So VirtualBox is a free option, but it doesn't work on the new Macs, and Oracle, who owns VirtualBox, says it never will. It's also pretty buggy. When I got a new Mac, I bought Parallels, and I was kind of bummed I had to pay about $80 US for that. But I love it. It's really good. It's like way less buggy than VirtualBox. It works. It's fast. The only thing is you also don't have free virtual machines. So like Microsoft gives you free virtual machines that you can download for VirtualBox. They don't do that for Parallels, and I ended up having like a short Twitter conversation with some Microsoft devs about that, and maybe that'll change, or maybe it has changed. I have another friend who works in a different department at Microsoft. He gave me a coupon code. I bought a license for Windows for $20. So if you have those people, they're very nice to have. But that being said, it's kind of worth it. You know, if you're a front-end developer, it's really nice to be able to test on this. So I created this code pen right here where we're going to solve some problems. So let me move around my Zoom controls and see if we can pull these out right here. So this is some custom form elements right here. So I'm going to do live coding because, you know, live coding during conferences always works out really well. So in this particular case right here, we have a select menu that I styled similar to what I talked about earlier. Has the lyrics for the Outkast song Hey Ya in there. So let's test this out in force colors mode. So we're going to do this live, of course. I'm going to hit the escape button, and it's going to open up this drawer right here. You can go to the rendering tab. If you don't see the rendering tab, you can hit these three little buttons right here, and you'll see it down there. I'm going to scroll down until I find force colors mode. Sometimes, like I said, DevTools will crash when you start playing around with this type of stuff, but let's just see what happens. So here we go. So we're in force colors mode. So everything, hopefully for you, looks like we have dark text on a white background. So you can see these form element boundaries for the button is not communicated right here. Let's fix that. The select element looks good though. So let me once again move around these zoom elements. I'm going to go down to the button, and you can see I have border 0 right here. So I'm going to, instead of this border, I'm going to say border 1 pixel, transparent, solid. And now we have a element, right? Or we have a boundary right here. So the select element looks pretty good right now, but let's test it under a dark color scheme. And so we do that. And of course the chevron doesn't show up because the chevron's also dark. So this is an issue, right? So I have this code, I commented out right here. We're going to use the force colors media query. And within that force colors media query, we're going to set the appearance back to revert, which the value of that I think is list box or something like that. And we set the background back to none. And that puts this little default chevron in here. The little default chevron looks a little funky, you know, because we have that padding in there. But that being said, it's apparent. You understand the function that this is a drop down. And that's pretty cool. That's where we're going right here. So I'm going to turn this off right here. And to get back to where I was, let's see if this crashes. No, we're good. And now I have an icon. So I have this icon kind of coming up right here. It's a nice, pretty star. You can see it's loading from this URL right here. That's a GitHub gist. You can kind of guess what's going to happen if we turn on force colors mode. It's going to look great when we're on a dark text on light background, but if we switch it to dark, it's not going to work properly. So once again, you can see this code I have. This is a lot of code. The cool thing about this mask color, this mask image CSS property that I am talking about right here, oops, is that it has very similar syntax to background, the background color, or like the background CSS property. So like where you would say like background image, you can use WebKit mask image. When you say background repeat, you can say WebKit mask repeat. Background image would map to WebKit mask, or background size would map to WebKit mask size, etc. So you can kind of see how that works right here. We have like the color shining through right here. We're using link text. You can also, of course, type canvas text, and then it'll change the color between the link text and the canvas text. That's pretty cool. But once again, the biggest thing is just go ahead and test stuff. Testing stuff is important. So let me get back to my slideshow here. So more information about this. We have this blog on windows.com that talks about high contrast mode. This is kind of an older blog. And then we have a great post written by the one and only Eric Bailey, who is the moderator on this call on Smashing Magazine. Just a couple months ago, he talks about a lot of force color stuff. This is really informative. So this is really good tools. And if y'all have any questions, use the ID24 hashtag on Twitter, and you can ask, or you can maybe tweet me later or bother me, or however that works. And that's about it. So thank you.
Amazing talk, Mike. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. And thanks for staying awake, Eric.
I don't see any specific question. There's only a consideration about Eric Eggert that say that a polypane, which are chrominum based, has the color scheme switcher in a very convenient place. So
I think our our esteemed technical coordinator, Patrick Lauk, is also pretty chatty on Twitter about running into some of the
But
bugs.
very,
that you
very,
found.
very, very interesting because some things, some topic about the hereditary of the colors set by the system, I don't know. So I'm very happy to follow your speech because it's the same topic that we have, for example, when we talk about digital documents like Word, PDF, that if the user set the default color for text, default color for the background, user that use the forced color can happily their preferred color inside the document in this case, and in your case inside the website. But so one question: how many developer did you think use this kind of fix for their template, their content?
That's a really good question. For a long time, it was pretty common advice to use the current color, but it didn't work properly in Chrome. So I see a lot of people doing things like that for force colors. I can tell you personally, I've been doing front end development for a pretty long time, and I really didn't even learn about force colors till maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. And that's one of the things that when I started learning about this, I'm like, why haven't I learned about this? Evidently, if 4% of people use this is kind of a big deal that we need to accommodate these people. So, that's one of the reasons why I'm here talking about it.
No more particular question. Eric, if you have something.
Yeah, if you don't mind. I was wondering kind of, one thing that I've kind of run into indirectly is like you're adding a bunch more CSS, and like, let me clarify that it's very valuable and necessary CSS, but kind of I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience introducing this into Drupal and what that was like.
Yeah, so mostly, you do add CSS in there, and the CSS, just through the nature of the CSS, it's more for the browser to download, which even though it's not a heck of a lot, it could be one of those situations where it's death by 1,000 paper cuts if you're adding in a whole bunch of things like that. Doing items like the setting your fill to current color within your SVGs is a little bit less. For me, it's not a heck of a lot of extra CSS. It works pretty well. Within Drupal core, we kind of manage it almost like you would expect. Drupal core is a server-side rendered PHP content management system, and we use PostCSS to kind of process everything. So we're able to nest the media queries under the selectors, which makes things a little bit cleaner. The most difficult thing, I think, for us is just getting proper testing. To get anything into a content management like this, it needs to go through multiple review cycles.
Mhm.
And because a lot of people are not familiar with this, they don't know how to test properly. So as I'm adding this stuff in there, I'm literally kind of having to train people up on what this is, how to work, how to use it, how to work it. And then of course I'm learning from other people who are more knowledgeable than me too. And I think that was just the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that reflects my experiences as well. So at least there's two of us,
Yeah.
Cool. Patrick also chimed in to say that in addition to Drupal kind of taking a really serious look at force colors mode, that Bootstrap is as well. He's helping with that. So I think that's worth noting in that there are major frameworks, both in terms of content management systems and front end layout, that are prioritizing this and allocating resources and time and potentially budget to it. And so I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, I'm doing some work. I've done a little bit of work on the US web design system for force colors mode too, because right now I'm working on a federal website. So
Awesome.
yeah, it's becoming more popular.
Yeah, I love the USWDS, so that's really cool to hear. One more thing, or potentially, I was wondering if you could kind of just go over again, not to put you on the spot, but the current color SVG bug, just kind of to provide a little bit more detail about what exactly the bug was.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this is something that I ran into, and it was kind of a pain in the butt, because when I was doing all this work, the bug was not yet fixed. So even within Internet Explorer, within Firefox, you can you the current color keyword will change properly within force colors mode, or within when it's high contrast, and it just works like you would expect. Your current color would change to dark text if your user has a theme that has dark text and light text, but that would not happen within Chromium. And of course, as you all know, Chromium kind of has the majority of the web. So we got around this by using a media query, the force colors active media query, and then we would set the fill to things like link text or canvas text or something like that. That was fixed. Geez, I think it was back in June or something like that. And so now we have to go back and we have to rip out some of this code, since we don't need it anymore. But that's a good thing. Ripping out code is always fun. So now within Chrome version 102, it behaves like the other browsers, and it behaves like Internet Explorer, which is, in my opinion, the correct behavior. And so I'm super happy that that bug is now fixed, and it's going to solve. People are using this technique because it worked for so long, and so when Chromium fixes bugs, they're probably fixing it for many websites across the web.
Yeah, don't break the web for sure.
Yep.
Yeah,
That should be a hashtag.
yeah. Cool. Well,
No, thank you.
yeah, Mike, this was a great talk, and I might be a little biased, but one of my favorite little dusty corners of the internet. So thank you for helping to shed some light on it, and I really appreciated how thorough you were in covering the topic as well.
Yeah, thanks for your Smashing Magazine article. I encourage everybody to go read Eric's Smashing Magazine article. You can see the link at the bottom right there.
Shucks. Roberto, any final
Thank
thoughts?
you.
Yeah.
No, thank you. It was very illuminating for me. So I will read the blog post and the article, because it's a new experience for me, this kind of development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, all right, everyone. If you enjoyed this talk, there's two things that you can do. There's more than two things, but two things on YouTube that you can do. You can hit that like button to say, I enjoyed this content. Thank you for sharing it. And you can also use that subscribe button to get updates for ID24 when we post new content to our YouTube channel. Also, a reminder that Inclusive Design 24 is a welcoming community. You can find a link to our code of conduct on the footer of every page on our website, inclusivedesign24.org. And Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you by Fable, Intopia, Barrier Break, TPGI, UX for the Win, Equal Entry, InfoAxia, Intuit, the Law Office of Lainey Feingold, Adrian Roselli LLC, and WebAble. Thanks to our sponsors' generosity, we are able to bring this conference to y'all for free. So again, thank you to them. We really appreciate their generosity and their support. And we'll be back on the top of the hour with our next section. And thank you one more time to Mike, and thank you to Roberto for being an excellent co-host.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Eric. And thanks everybody for watching.